Hello. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about another item out of the collection that I feel is a very important piece to understand. There was a young man. He was 16 years old at the time of the attack, and he wasn't a serviceman. He was actually a contractor working there at Pearl Harbor on the Navy base itself. He was a sheet metal worker. And so, like a lot of young men during the time just before the war, times were pretty hard back in the States, and there was not a lot of jobs and not a lot of opportunities. And those opportunities that came up were quite scarce. And Daniel Bugby, who is the young man that we're going to discuss here just a little bit, was one of those young fellows who had an opportunity to work for a contractor who had a contract to go to Pearl Harbor and to actually do some work there on the base. And so he had traveled at that time to the base at Pearl Harbor and was there during the attack. And after the attack was over with, being the skills that he had in metalworking, obviously he was put to work at trying to do some of the work on bringing the ships that were damaged back into service. And he worked on 3 different ships. He worked on the USS West Virginia, he worked on the USS Maryland, and he worked on the US Oglala. Now, the Oglala was a mine layer, and it had gotten sunk early in the attack. Actually did one of the Oklahoma things and rolled over on its side. Not many people were on not many of the servicemen were actually on board at the time because it was undergoing some repairs. And so it had a very minimal crew on board at the time, and most of those men got off. And so they weren't trapped in like the crew of the USS Oklahoma. But they righted the Oglala, and the Oglala was going to be put back into service, and Daniel Bugby worked on that ship to help get it back into service. And as he worked on all 3 of the vessels, again, he was one of those that picked up a few souvenirs, a few things to keep as reminders for himself in life, and he had kept those all the way until he died later in the years. And one of the pieces that he actually picked up was on the Oglala, and it was a set of keys. The set of keys that you'll see in the exhibit is quite important. He actually, he probably didn't understand what he had picked up at the time, but what he had actually picked up was a set of keys that were for what they called ready ammunition boxes. The ammunition boxes that were placed at different places, different locations on the ship close to where the armaments were at, held ammunition that was supposed to be ready for firing. Most of the time they were locked, and especially when they weren't out to sea. When they went out to sea or they were in combat conditions, those boxes would be unlocked. But when they were at shore and in the base, obviously they would keep those boxes locked up. Same way with the armories, and the armories was where that they would keep small arms. All the ships had armories, and they would have small arms on board, so they would carry some Springfield rifles, 45 automatic, semi-automatic handguns. A lot of times they would carry Browning automatic rifles. They would have maybe some .30 caliber machine guns on board, some Thompson submachine guns. There was different weapons that would keep in the armories. And again, when they were in base, typically they kept those armories locked. And one of the people who were actually in charge of keeping those armories and the ready ammunition boxes under lock and key were chiefs on board the ships. And they would all have master keys that they would keep on their person. One of the problems that occurred during the attack at Pearl Harbor was that many of the chiefs were ashore. and weren't on board the ships. And so the keys weren't readily available for the men to be able to unlock the ready ammunition boxes or the armories to be able to get to the weapons, to be able to fight and to go and defend themselves against the attack. So there was a lot of the ammunition boxes that had to be broken into because they couldn't get keys. In the case of Oglala was one of the first ships to actually get some of its guns firing before it was hit and sunk. They were able to get their deck guns firing onto the enemy planes as they were coming in, and it was greatly the responsibility of one man, and his name was Anthony Zito, and he was a chief electrician's mate that was on board the Oglala. And so since he was on board, he had his keys with him, so he was able to unlock the armory, unlock the ready ammunition boxes, and the crew that was on board were able to get their guns, their 3-inch guns that was on board, firing against the planes, plus getting out the small arms and also using them to fire against the planes before the ship got hit and then would later roll over. But Anthony Zito's keys, we don't know for sure that this is his set of keys, but it's highly likely that this set of keys were the actual keys that Anthony Zito had on board the Oglala and was able to get the weapons firing so quickly because of that set of keys. In many cases aboard other ships, the delay in being able to defend themselves against the enemy as they were coming in was primarily due to the fact that they didn't have the keys to be able to get into the armories and into the ready ammunition boxes so that they could immediately get to firing and to defending themselves. So it's a very unique artifact that's in the grouping, and one that it's not just a set of keys. It's a set of keys that was very important throughout the fleet at that time that was stationed there. Every chief would keep a set of keys like this, and those set of keys were very important to the defense of the harbor. And in many cases, those set of keys were lacking.